Alright, I remember my password. With the news coming out of the cancellation of the next Far Cry extraction shooter, I figured this would be a good time to stop and reflect on what happened to this franchise. Far Cry is a series that I have truly enjoyed over the course of my life, starting with Far Cry 2 back in 2008 and peaking in my opinion with Far Cry 3. But I still have a lot of fondness for 4 and 5, but post Far Cry 4 there has been a very noticeable downward trend in the quality of the series. I'm mostly going to be addressing what went wrong with 5 and 6, but they both do have a decent amount of redeeming qualities that I'll mention, but we have to just acknowledge the fact that Ubisoft has lost the plot on what made these older games so impactful and memorable, and just makes these newer ones feel like such wasted potential. I think the biggest thing that I and many others have noticed about not just Far Cry, but Ubisoft games in general, is this exceeding amount of bloat content that gets continually bigger and bigger with each release. Every game seems to be getting larger, and yet there is like less to do at the same time. So many mechanics get watered down, but they add more missions and more collectibles that don't serve a purpose and ends up just dragging the experience more than helping players get more out of their money. This definitely started with Far Cry 5 when they removed the hunting mechanic being an integral component to upgrading your storage and replacing that mechanic with perk points and essentially just making hunting a way to make money. Now to some people, especially casual players, this is a good change because it meant that you didn't have to grind out hunting to make meaningful strides in upgrading your gear. You just have to stumble into a prepper stash, get a few points, and then you unlock what you need. But I think this is one of the bigger faults, especially now in Far Cry. It's this appeal to the incredibly casual audience. When a game has a ton of bloat content as well as being a casual game, it doesn't have much difficulty, and without difficulty in a game like this where there's so much bloat, it feels incredibly repetitive and taxing to get through. Playing a modern Far Cry game sort of feels like doom scrolling or just eating fast food. Like, I know I'm consuming something and it's making me feel good in the moment, but I know in a few hours I'm going to feel like shit from a butt. I'm not sure who keeps getting convinced to add a bunch of short-term dopamine hits of 4-person firefight missions and 400,000 collectibles, and that'll be the thing to truly propel the franchise to the next level, but they need to stop treating us like cattle. Like, yeah, I mean, this appeal to casual players is good for a short burst of sales, but you're only going to target that chunk of people when we already know the truth is that casual players will still pick up more in-depth and difficult games if they're good. But we know for a fact that those players will not go back and pick up mediocre mass-produced games. I think something that's been lost on this franchise and is like the biggest part of why I think it's falling short is there is no more progression in a Far Cry game. I think this problem is made the most apparent in Far Cry 6 because they did add a new interesting mechanic to the series, which is like these different types of armors and having legitimate impact on regular enemies versus just having your specials be armored. But then they immediately fumble this idea by giving you everything that you need right off the rip. You can complete the entirety of Far Cry 6 with the armor-piercing rounds and the marksman rifle that you get on Tutorial Island without feeling a slight bit of resistance. And that's really jarring when you compare the theme to the game, being all about improvising. The game's guerrilla mode is a little bit tougher, but mostly in the sense that everything just does a fuck ton more damage, and they send an obscene amount of enemies at you whenever you fail stealth, and they call for reinforcements. They do that instead of fundamentally changing the game to be more challenging with modifiers and have better AI strategy against the player. When it comes to the normal difficulty, the games are incredibly easy and hardly require the player to even pay any mind to the features that they add to the game. Like, this problem is huge in 6. I never had to use a majority of the features that were given because the use cases for them were super niche or they were just outclassed in every single way. I never had to use poison ammo, I never used blast rounds, incendiary rounds were fucking useless. A majority of the armor pieces in the game did the same thing as a skill did in a previous game, but those skills don't serve a purpose anymore, so there's no reason to give up an armor slot to use that gear. You get everything you need within 20 minutes, which wouldn't be so bad if the games weren't getting bigger. But now I'm just playing the same game with no progression for even more time of my life. If you're not going to challenge me, I don't want to stay stagnant for a long time. That just isn't fun. My issue with the current direction of the game is that it isn't 2010 anymore. We can't get away with making these kind of games. Players actually want to do things that have depth and have meaningful use to them, rather than just endless shooting galleries, as much as shareholders and executives will disagree with that. These kinds of boneheaded thought processes pigeonhole these companies into making games that aren't engaging, but also fill them with an endless amount of repeating content, and it just weighs down any possible upside that the game had. Like shit, we are wasting quality performances out of some actors and the time of everybody that actually had passion working on the project. I pity the devs who wanted these features to matter and engage the player just to be drowned out by someone who doesn't care about a vision unless it's looking at a dollar bill. And then they get fired because the game didn't sell as well as they vastly overestimated. It's just fucking ridiculous. Now, I don't want to say that the newer games are completely unsavable garbage. They just missed out on a lot of their potential. I know logically Far Cry 5 was a mediocre game, but in my heart, it's my second favorite of the franchise. All these games have parts to them that are redeeming, and that's what makes them hurt the most when they come out and they're average at the very best. The series is so loaded with potential, but Ubisoft continually gets in their own way, and it prevents the series from making strides to bring them back into massive cultural relevance. Far Cry 5 is the game that I wish had followed the formula just a little bit more, and especially with the hunting culture that comes with America. Having a game set like this in Montana against a religious fanatic cult is the perfect backdrop coming off of these games set in exotic places. In those other games, the meaning of Far Cry felt like you were a long way from home and you're lost, but in 5 it felt like Far Cry meant that you were so close, yet you've never been more isolated at the same time. Thematically, that's really cool to me, and having that approach is what makes the weakest part of this game even more disappointing, which was that silent protagonist. 3 and 4 did an excellent job of having a cat and mouse game with the protagonist and the feeling of the character growing into the person who they become with these emotional moments in these interactions, or just making the story feel more authentic and presented well, rather than everyone talking to a mute. That just feels flat. Especially with how often each of the antagonists personally interact with the player, it feels like wasted potential having the character be silent during all of it. Like, these scenes don't hit for me as much as they should when I'm just sitting there completely stoic and silent as I am being tortured. I am getting words carved into my skin and then peeled off. Or people are having like these in-depth conversations about morality and the future of society if the world ends. They're trying to do these things with me, but I'm just sort of sitting there as like an observer outside of my body watching this happening to someone else. It's really weird for this experience because, like, I know that it's supposed to be a player insert kind of deal, but I just don't think that's how Far Cry stories are told. You end up in this world and you meet these characters and you develop relationships with your allies to help fight your big bad. It doesn't feel as impactful when you're just silent the whole time. It doesn't feel like you exist. And it makes your relationship with these people feel less important because fundamentally you're not really interacting with them. You're just having quest markers talk at you and then you go and do the objective. This is especially important when it comes to antagonists, like having Voss and Hoyt personally taunt and mess with Jason and hearing how Jason responds to these things and how his emotions to the events unfold. Watching him progress into this cold-blooded killer made his character feel so much more alive and impactful. And it's just such a shame too. That supporting cast in 5 is actually a very solid set of characters. They fit the area. I love Pastor Jerome and Nick Rye. These characters would have felt a lot more memorable if I was having back and forth conversations with them rather than them just being at a point and talking to me. However, we had a massive overcorrection in one direction with Far Cry 6, where Danny is now able to speak, but the supporting cast of characters are legitimately so strange, and all of them feel out of place. I do like the scenes with Danny, and the approach with the third-person cutscenes, it was a little strange, but honestly, it grows on you. I wouldn't be entirely against it returning, but these side characters, I genuinely could not be interested in any part of their lives or personalities because they all just seem so Marvel quirk-coded compared to the environment that they were in. Previous Far Cry titles had that feeling of tension and seriousness with the characters, but Thematically in Far Cry 6, it didn't feel like there was a violent revolution against an evil dictator because everything just had to be a joke or everything had to be a little quirky. Like, one of your primary allies in the game is two musical artists and their big bumbling idiot friend. Nothing ever felt serious in this world that's trying to present to the player how serious Anton's dictatorship is. We hear everywhere about the evil of him and how he puts the outcasts into labor camps and fucking pours metal on people to turn them into statues to sell them to rich people. Genuinely abhorrent, evil things. And then the approach that the revolution takes to fighting him is blasting some music outside of a mansion and just mowing down countless clone soldiers. It doesn't have any of the grit or real questions that come with Revolution like Far Cry 4 did, where ultimately you realize the people you're helping aren't that much better than the person that you're trying to overthrow. 6's Revolution feels like a purely benevolent one with no real ideology other than just killing Anton Castillo, and it doesn't make you stop to consider everything. I'm not looking for Ernest Hemingway level of commentary on political revolution, but God, I would love a little bit more substance rather than the super basic level narrative of just pure good versus pure evil. You've already had the formula there. I don't know why you keep insisting on dumbing down things, or the few flashes of actual depth you get shut down instantly by Danny trying to be the perfect good guy. And I think that stems from just Castillo not really caring about Danny in the first place. You are simply nothing to the main antagonist of the game, and it doesn't feel like Far Cry at all. Imagine if Voss genuinely didn't give a shit about Jason, just had zero emotional investment, and showed up maybe once or twice throughout the story until the very end of his, character arc. It would feel completely pointless if you don't have those personal moments. They influence the character into who they become. There's simply just too much disconnect for me to feel compelled to be a rival to Anton, and it felt more like I was just simply progressing the revolution because the game told me to do it. So, what would I want to see out of this franchise in the future? I think there's a good argument for pieces of everything to make it into a future title, as well as a few new fresh perspectives on things as well. I think the major classic thing that I want to see come back is a use for hunting and collectibles around the map. Give them some purpose, give them some value for upgrading your gear and get rare rewards for grinding out that money and buying those treasure maps. Bring back the skill trees that vary how you deal with enemy encounters. Heavies shouldn't be able to be taken down by default. You shouldn't get your grappling hook in the tutorial of the game. You should have to get these tools that allow you to approach missions that are designed around these objects being placed later in the game, rather than having this one tool fits all approach. Give players that sense of progression and getting better at handling these situations. I was a fan of the different ammo types in 6, but there has to be a different way to implement this feature that gives them more than one singular use case. The future gameplay of this franchise, they need to emphasize that immersive sim part of the game that used to be really prevalent in Far Cry 2. Give players different ways to tackle objectives, like a million different ways can be done, and you see it in all these creative videos, but the average player is just gonna run through the game because it's just so painfully easy. They can't give you all the tools you need off the start. You need to be disempowered. You need to have the game have some difficulty so that you can feel like you're progressing through. You can shrink the number of side activities and missions, like these tiny activities, so that the difficulty doesn't feel intrusive, but it makes the game a denser experience compared to a very broad and unfulfilling one. I love clearing outposts, don't get me wrong, but I don't think I need to be helping out ambushes that are in progress for 5 durable seals. I think making that player weak, having to adapt to the world around them, is how Far Cry should be instead of this one man versus the world power fantasy. Being a subversive rat makes these personal vendettas against the antagonist feel like they make sense because they would be justified in their taunting rather than coming off as stupid and overzealous. I'm not saying the game needs to be like fucking Elden Ring meets Metal Gear Solid 5, but you don't have to hold my hand and give me everything I need immediately. I would appreciate a little challenge and have the enemies feel like they have some semblance of strategy instead of rushing me one at a time and dying in one hit. Slow down my speed, make me less perfect with weapons until I get some skill or upgrade my gear. I want to feel like I'm getting better at fighting against an enemy that is overpowering me, and then I get stronger over the course of the game, especially if the gameplay loop is just going to be super basic to begin with. I need something that pulls me away from running from outpost to outpost, clearing them, and then following it up with one singular linear mission and repeating that cycle until the game ends. What's the point of having these big, expansive open worlds if we aren't going to utilize all the things within it in a practical way? I think the last thing that really needs to be changed, and this is like the biggest thing with 6 I'd mentioned, is the tone. The tone of these games is so weird now. Just like Far Cry 5, okay, I get it. It's like a satirized, version of America. It's the extreme over the top, sort of redneck. It's just country energy. That makes sense. But Far Cry 6 was weird because everybody just felt like they were acutely aware of the fact that they were in a video game and that they were untouchable. I want to see them take that gritty and raw feeling that used to be in these games. I want to see people be truly evil or do things for pure greed, or maybe having the allied factions have some flaws or difficult things for us, the player, to be able to connect with them. There's something about that situational alliance that feels like it's emphasizing the survival aspect of the game, rather than feeling like you're commanding an entire army by your side. I don't want to feel like some superhero with my bunch of quirky companions who dress completely out of place and feel like they always have something to prove to me. I want Resistance members to feel real and like their lives are at risk and their stakes on the line. Unlike Far Cry 6, where most of the characters, acted like Revolution was a game and that nothing was dangerous, and then they would just randomly kill off characters to remind the player, hey, this is a serious game sometimes, in which it does work for a second, but then the characters go back to just being little Marvel clones. It feels like such a waste of serious acting out of the antagonist to have like 5 or 6 wacky and zany characters just completely drown out that experience. I can accept one, and that's Herc, because Herc is the GOAT. But if I had to deal with like fucking 7 of him at once, it would get pretty tiresome, especially if he was trying to lead like a social justice revolution and not just like blow shit up for the monkey god, When I see all these leaks about the future of the game going in a completely different direction to what made the previous ones so compelling is really disheartening, because it's showing that Ubisoft is learning the wrong lesson from each new title. Introducing a timer, going back to save your family members from the cult, it's like they're trying to rehash ideas for a new game, but they're taking all the ones that don't need to be redone, and then the game gets canceled and restarted so many times, who even knows what'll happen with it? But I want to see this franchise get back into greatness. I hate games being right on the cusp of being good and snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. I think a good turn for this kind of game is leaning into that immersive sim with a focus on actual survival and playing smart with your resources and abilities. I want them to live up to the potential that they have, but these are just my opinions and I could be totally wrong. But I'm sure there's so many people that can agree, or at least find something that they can relate to that would want to be added into the future of this franchise. I'm sure there is so much more I could talk about this series, but I've been rambling for way too long, and I think it'd just be better to make like specific Far Cry game videos if that's something that ever comes across my mind to do, because there is so much more I could say in particular, but I just want to air out some of my frustrations now about the series as a whole, if that makes sense. But it'd be great to hear some other opinions from people to see what's been going wrong with this franchise and what they'd want to see changed or brought back, to its current state. So feel free to talk about that. And that's about it. See ya.